I have been a regular critic of President Putin. I've been a regular critic of President Putin on Russian state media since 2014. Um, some of the strongest criticism out there of President Putin is that he did not intervene back in 2014 when the last legitimate democratically elected Ukrainian government was overthrown in a violent and unconstitutional West backed putsch in that country. And that everything that has happened since is basically making up for that mistake. Not supporting the Ukrainian government when it was under assault at the time, not going immediately in with military when there was no Ukrainian military, because the Ukrainian military did not respond in 2014 to the commands of the new Westback putsch. In fact, there were tens of thousands of Ukrainian troops that defected to Russia, to the Donbass republics. And you don't have to take my word for it, because Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, did a report at the time talking about the defection of 75% of the then Ukrainian Navy. So there was no military opposition at the time. That is exactly why the Kiev regime formed these nascent battalions to try to seize control of the Donbass, to extend their seizure of power to the east of the country, and everything that has happened since. And Putin has admitted that this was a mistake, that he should have acted before. He has admitted his mistake. Another of my implicit criticisms is that he has been too much of a in Russian, it would be a Zapadnophile, a Westernophile. He has had, from his time in Germany, far too romantic and far too trusting a perception of the perfidious politicians of the European Union, in particular Germany. That has been part of my criticism of him, since then. I think that even when he launched the intervention in the Ukrainian civil conflict in 2002, he did it with far too small a military force, 150,000 troops, when the Kiev regime's standing army at that time was 250,000, because he did not want a major conflict. He was signaling to NATO his limited intentions, and that he wanted simply to force a political settlement that they walked away from with the Minsk Accords. And he paid for that. He paid for that during the embarrassment of the autumn of 2022, when he was suddenly forced to play catch up and mobilize Russian troops after the Kiev regime had already done so and he had not responded, all because he was trying to appease the West. And that was a tragic and mistake to which Russia is only now catching up. So I would say that has his criticism of his foreign policy of being too appeasing of the West, and of being too soft in the special military operation, the intervention in the Ukrainian civil conflict, has been one of the most strident criticisms of the Russian government from within Russia. And it's a criticisms that I have voiced since 2014. So in West Ukraine, of course, it's different.
Yes, it is.
Decades of the Soviet Union couldn't expunge Banderite fascism out of West Ukraine. And nothing that Vladimir Putin, far softer than Stalin, is going to be capable of doing that. And I do not believe that Russia is going to militarily occupy West Ukraine. They have no intentions of doing so. It will be, the Ukrainian RUP state that is left and handed to the West, as I don't believe that Poland and Romania and Hungary are going to seize off pieces of it historically. I think that NATO will establish it as a Ukrainian rump state that they will recognize as the legitimate Ukrainian government, and that will be the dividing line of the new Cold War. It's not really a Cold War, it's actually a hot war now. But I do not believe that the majority of the Ukrainian population, and I worried about this a bit myself at the beginning of the conflict. Certain there is a portion of it, but particularly in East Ukraine, I think you underestimate the extent that the people of the country resent this regime that has been forced on them. And when you see the not just hundreds of thousands, but millions of Ukrainian men that have fled the country or are actively drafting or avoiding forced conscription in Ukraine, you see a bit of the real sentiment towards the regime in Kiev by kind of I would say, the silent majority, bare majority maybe, but the silent majority of the Ukrainian people. Again, West Ukraine is something completely different. That wasn't even part of Ukraine up until the 1930s. So wonderful. We've saved all the people in the rest of Ukraine. We've created more strategic depth, and hopefully we have dealt the reputation of the U.S. hegemon a embarrassment and a blow that they will find very difficult to recover from. And that's exactly what they are constantly talking about, the threat of a domino theory, that if Russia succeeds in Ukraine, then China will finally recover its lost territory of Taiwan that the U.S. is encouraging militant separatism in. So, and likewise with other countries around the world, that this will mark, shall we say, the death knell of U.S.-led Western global hegemony. I think that's already actually been marked in Georgia and Syria, where U.S. proxy forces and forces found defeat by Russia. Okay, so I mean, I think we can ignore the handful of Western agents of influence like Navalny that have no political support whatever in Russia, that they are simply, creations. The Russian population does not have a significant proportion of pro-Western liberals. Let's make that clear from the very beginning. Even Navalny's own people, when he was polled him at 2% on a good day, right? So there is no political appetite in Russia for pro-Western liberalism because Russia is not pro-Western and it's not liberal. I mean, yeah, somewhere between 2 and 5% of the population, but even that divided among different little egos. So, I mean, that is just propaganda noise in the background as far as I'm concerned. I mean, obviously the biggest real opposition to Putin is the Communist Party in Russia, which normally polls somewhere between 10 and 20%. They scored much less this time. But lots of communists, lots of members of all the other opposition parties voted for Putin. Why? Because all during Putin's governance from 1999 on up, there has been a broad consensus and unity among the Russian people of agreement with the course that he has charted for the resurrection of Russia from the absolute economic and social catastrophe of the 1990s after the self-dissolution.
Yes, I know. I was in middle school when he came to power. And okay, so you say liberal democracy is a sham, especially in this part of the world. Okay, I understand. But at the same time, we have to face the facts. I mean, what if the opposition to the West dies with him? I'm sorry to be cynical, but everybody dies. And
then you're not aware of the other political parties. The Communist Party is the second polling party in the country. they completely support Russian foreign policy right now and the special military operation, except that they would separate from the West even more. They would pull out of the World Trade Organization and the International Monetary Fund, which are actually not bad ideas. So the third largest party is the Liberal Democratic Party of Russia, which isn't liberal. It's not democratic. Hasn't really been a party up until the death of Zhirinovsky, more a cult of personality. But they're what you might call soft Russian nationalists, right? Not the ethnic nationalists, which are opposed to the current government and fighting for the Kiev regime in Ukraine. But the nationalists, they think that Putin has reacted far too much with kid gloves during this operation. They want to respond with attacks on NATO countries under the premise that every Russian that has been killed in this conflict should be met with at least one Western citizen killed, if not 10 in
Or
conflict.
hardcore pro,
Putin is the moderate. Putin is the moderate. Putin is as liberal as Russia comes. He's as liberal and previously pro-Western as Russia comes. The Western people may not want to hear that. They may not want to believe that. But their own polls, right? Levada isn't just, pro-Western. It is literally funded by the U.S. government, by the National Endowment for Regime Change. Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, they call it the National Endowment for Democracy. But that's what it's, my bad. That's what it's funded by. And they show that Putin's approval rating is where it is, right? They show the Russian support for the special military operation. But you don't even have to see that. You can actually see that in the military enlistment. Okay, so first of all, absolutely 100%. The only way to protect a country from pernicious U.S. and European influences to ban all of these foreign NGOs. They don't represent the social society of the country they are in. They represent the government and the special interests of the country that they come from, right? You have to have indigenous movements, right? The Soviet Union, Russia have a long tradition of their own feminism. What feminism right now in Russia, I would say more than anything else, is that Russian women willingly took a step back. Not that I necessarily even agree with it, from a more, shall we say, strictly equal sense of the genders, to recognize in a legal and societal sense, to recognize that there are differences between the two sexes, the two genders, because as far as I'm concerned, there are only two genders, and I don't care what you think about that. They wanted to be treated with more femininity. They think the Russian women, by and large, thought that feminism had gone too far. That's now not saying that they want to be discriminated against, but more Russian women wanted to stay home and raise children. I don't even agree with that myself necessarily, but it is a really undeniable fact of living in Russia. Patriarchal oppression or anything. Russian society is still largely quietly run by the women. They just wanted to be treated a little bit more like women. The Russian government has long funded NGOs. It's simply that there was more money coming into NGOs that were taking more money from the US and Western government, that it was an uncompetitive playing field, right? Now, NGOs are, they are, one, self-funding in the internet age, the internet, Kickstarter, all of these types of self-generating are just as active in Russia, with local equivalents, as they are in the West. And there is also, the it is largely the standard Western conception of courting the business community for charity. I find that distasteful myself. I find capitalism distasteful. I'll simply put it that way. I'm not interested in pinching pennies. I'm happy working for the state. But families do not want their children exposed to an environment where their children are taught that that is normal, because it is biologically not normal. Now, has there always been a homosexual?
But what do you do with the people that are already like that? Because if you tell them that they are not normal, what do you do? Conversion therapy? At the same time, I don't think, and even Julie Bindel says that you have to abandon this idea that you were born this way and all the rest. At the same time, you have to find ways for these people to be accepted in the society. In what way? If a doctor, a surgeon is a gay person, I mean, it's his business, okay?
And that's exactly the view in Russian society. The rule of Russian society is simply that they don't parade their sexuality in the streets, encouraging other people's children to follow that sexual course. What they do in their own bedrooms, no one cares about.
Do you actually
what they do in the gay clubs in Moscow? No one, what?
Do you think it's actually possible to become gay? Because as I don't believe there is a gay gene, at the same time, I think there needs to be more research, because I can't see myself becoming gay. No matter how much I try, I mean, there has to be something in between nurture and nature. I can't literally see myself, becoming a lesbian by choice.
No. It's a series of subjective micro experiences going through your early childhood and up into puberty, right? That take an idea of fetishes, right? How do people develop fetishes? I find women with long hair unsexually attractive. I don't know why. I've always been attracted to women with short hair. Why? Because some little micro event in my formative years developed me that way. It's the same thing with homosexuality, right? It's developed through micro experiences, and you can't weed it all out. And I don't actually think there's anything wrong with being homosexual, but it doesn't mean that it is something that should be societally promoted, normalized, and reified. That is a sociological experiment that Russia doesn't want to play with. What people do in their own bedroom is their own business. What people do in the private gay clubs in Moscow and the rest of the country, except Chechnya, is their own business, right? But they're not going to promote that lifestyle to other people's children.
So you say that they were declared extremists because the Russians feared that they were promoting that, and so it's not gays,
it's not homosexuals that are declared extremists. It is the Western LGBTQ political ideological movement.
Okay, I know, but at the same time, there is a lot of homophobia, because I don't think people are as open-minded as we are, and probably this would just incentivize those people to go against feminists, to go against homosexuals.
Well, I don't know. You keep trying to relate feminism back to this. I don't actually see the link, to be perfectly honest. In fact, I think the promotion of this whole transsexual, to the extent it has been into the West, is distinctly anti-feminist.
No, yes, here I agree, because I'm a radical feminist. I'm not on the queer side. But my fear is, at the same time, I do not want to see, for instance, people linking too much, for instance, homosexuality, feminism, and women's rights organizations to the so-called depraved West.
Okay.
And I think the Russians, by declaring them extremists, are incentivizing people to do exactly that.
Okay. Certainly, I mean, with regards to feminism, I can't agree, because the Soviet Union has had a earlier and stronger tradition of feminism than I think the West, most of the West did. So I certainly don't see that. With regards, to homosexuality and the rest, I have not seen that there is a greater percentage of hate violence, even though in Russia it's not classified as hate per se against a particular gender. But I have not seen, for instance, that there is a greater percentage of it in Russia than there is in the United States. I think you will find that leftists in Russia are probably less accepting of that than I am.